Posso passar aqui na frente ao portão?
Tomorrow they say it's going to be kind of heavy rain.
Okay. To be seen.
There's no here.
Yeah, first of all, I think that last year, I mean, but I don't understand.
À noite deitado das crianças.
Já se conhece então?
Sim, muitos anos. Como estás?
Muy bien, muy bien. ¿Está todo bien?
Sim. Estava chegado de Brasil, na grande delegação espanhola.
Carmen estaba ahí.
Com a Maria. Atlantic International.
Para os dois lados da audiência. Bom, é com muito gosto que vos dou as boas-vindas a esta conferência. Quero agradecer, obviamente, aqui ao Sr. Ministro, que tem sempre uma agenda muito ocupada, a amabilidade de se ter deslocado para participar, para partilhar a sua visão desta temática connosco. Quero agradecer também ao Presidente do Conselho Nacional de Reitores, aos Srs. Reitores, aos Srs. Vice-Reitores, Presidentes de Politécnicos, Embaixadores, representantes do Banco Europeu de Investimento, também vejo ali o Kim. Muito obrigado. Aos oradores, obviamente, pela amabilidade de terem aceitado o nosso convite e a vocês que estão aqui hoje e que se deslocaram para conversarmos um bocadinho sobre esta temática que é tão importante. I will speak now in English, since some of the participants do not speak Portuguese, so everybody can understand me. Of course, what I was saying is that I'm most pleased to welcome you to this conference, Exchanges on Science-Industry Collaboration. This conference was organized against the background of the European Semester of Economic Policy Coordination in the European Union. It aims to contribute to the implementation of the country-specific recommendations on business and university cooperation, which have been addressed to Denmark and to Portugal. Business-university cooperation, or more broadly science-industry collaboration, continues to be high in the European Union agenda. The European Commission's work programme for 2018 is very clear in saying that the Commission will continue to use the European semester to coordinate economic policies and promote a growth strategy that delivers on investment, sound public finances, and structural reforms. Investment in research and development is at the core of the Europe 2020 strategy, which is the EU's agenda for growth and jobs for the current decade. Europe 2020 is about smart, sustainable, and inclusive growth as a way to overcome the structural weaknesses in Europe's economy. Aims at improving its competitiveness and productivity and underpinning a sustainable market economy. The Commission is now working on the preparation of the next framework programme, as you know, the successor of Horizon 2020, to kick off in 2021. It will be based on the Horizon 2020 interim evaluation, on the recommendations of the LAMI high-level group report, published in July 2017, and also on extensive feedback received in various formats from stakeholders. And I must say that the Commission received almost 3,500 responses and over 300 position papers to this consultation. Among the many interesting findings of the Horizon interim evaluation, it was estimated that every euro invested brings back 6 to 8.5 euros in the economy. So this is a huge potential and a huge leverage to the economy. The evaluation of Horizon 2020 showed strong EU added value by giving unique opportunities, promoting competition, and access to new knowledge. In mid-2018, the Commission will table a proposal for the next framework programme. And the next wave of breakthrough innovation will be more based on scientific knowledge and expertise, where Europe is strong: artificial intelligence, data, graphene, gene editing. And it will transform existing sectors with high economic and social benefits, like transport, healthcare, energy, and education. However, it will require major changes in policy response, more high risk and longer term funding, because innovation cycle is longer than the app economy and technological risks are higher. It will also require closer interaction with public policy and regulation to enter and scale up in heavily regulated markets. In October, the Commission announced it will spend 30 billion of the EU Research and Innovation Funding Programme, Horizon 2020, during 2018-2020, this 2-year period, including 2.7 billion to kickstart the European Innovation Council that you may have heard of. And the European Innovation Council will help Europe harnessing the next innovation wave. It will reform the funding of the innovator-centric, simple and agile. It will focus on highest market failures and EU added value. That means breakthrough innovation with scale-up potential. That's what we want. It will run as a pilot until 2020 in order to test and improve the new model for the subsequent period. And Commissioner Moedas, that you all know well, he said, "I am convinced that the core values of Horizon 2020 and its successor have to be excellence, openness and impact." And the representations of the European Commission in Portugal and Denmark organized this conference to increase ownership for the European semester by national authorities and stakeholders in the respective member states. We want to foster exchanges on the science industry collaboration, provide learning outcomes, and contribute to the implementation of the respective country-specific recommendations. And why Portugal and Denmark? Well, Portugal and Denmark are different countries in many respects, and their innovation systems are one such differentiating point. Portugal is a moderate innovator, according to the European Innovation Scoreboard 2017, and by the same analytical framework, Denmark is an innovation leader. Interestingly, over time, both countries' performance has declined to that of the EU in 2010, and by a similar magnitude, 2.4% for Denmark and 2.8% for Portugal. And the starting points and results achieved so far may be different, but clearly both countries face the same common challenges which are worthwhile discussing today. And the themes to be discussed today's conference are structured in 3 panels. First, we'll look at the obstacles and incentives to science-industry collaboration. Then, we'll look at financing options for science-industry collaboration. And then, we'll look at the role of higher education in this process. The discussion is expected to go around questions like, how do we incentivize universities, polytechnics, research organizations, and other sources of science and knowledge to cooperate with the business sector and the society at large? What options are available to incorporate science and academic knowledge into commercial products and services for the common good? Which obstacles have to be overcome? Which incentives are working and which incentives are not? What are the financing options supporting the objectives that we pursue? And does higher education systems need to be reformed to better serve science-industry collaboration? How do we evaluate the results of such policies? These are just a few questions we would like to address today with expert speakers originating from Denmark, Portugal, international organizations. They represent academia, research organizations, knowledge transfer organizations, corporate sector, government, public administration, and financing entities. And I truly hope that the audience can engage lively with them and we have a lively debate. And to conclude, just a few words of gratitude. First, to the speakers who generously accepted to share their work and knowledge with us today. Second, to all of those involved in the organization of the conference, inside the representations team, and to Catarina and Marcia very specifically, and also Ana Correia, of Director General for Research and Innovation, and for all the good analytical work that you have given to us. And I wish you a very productive day. Very good day. I forgot to introduce the most important person in the room, the Minister for Science and Education, Higher Education in Portugal, Mr. Manuel Heitor.
Bom dia a todos. Não sei o que é que me espera com este anúncio, mas certamente o importante é o debate, não é certamente o que eu vou dizer. I believe we should speak in English. So let me thank you for the invitation, and to Katarina, that is somewhere, that has been sending emails almost every day to make sure that I was here on time. And certainly it is a great pleasure always to discuss, particularly this meeting is very timely. As you know, the discussion over the coming year, probably until the European elections, will be particularly important in terms of the next framework program, but certainly until the next couple of months, where the Commission will define a proposal to be subject to the Parliament, to the European Parliament, in the terms of the next framework programs. And the Lamy report was already presented and discussed. Probably the most important issue in the Lamy report is the statement that Europe should double until 2030 the overall investment in R&D. And when we write and we discuss this statement, particularly in the European Council of Research Ministers, it was definitely a large consensus. The point is where the report is discussed in other type of councils, particularly in the ECOFIN. And there, the discussion is very much different. But I would like to introduce this discussion and to thank you, the organizers, for bringing Denmark, because there are certainly one key issue about the overall investment in R&D in Europe, particularly when compared with other large regions, particularly the United States, but also more and more with China. But apart from the overall investment, there is a second question, which usually it is not discussed, because the overall investment evens in itself a distribution among different parts of Europe. And this question, which most of the time the Commission don't want to make it clear, and we have here Ramon, so I'm writing just in front of him, because we have been discussing for many years this issue, why the Commission certainly don't want to make it more clear the diversification of situations across Europe. And this is important nowadays, because the financial crisis which affected the world at large, but particularly Europe, and very, very significantly the European peripheries, and particularly southern of European countries, had a dramatic effect on an increasing diverging Europe. Europe today, in 2017, is different from Europe in the year 2000, or even in the year 2010. And certainly the geography of knowledge was particularly affected during the crisis by a movement towards the concentration of investments in some zones, and we know where, of Europe. In particular, and this is important to not to compare, but to discuss the different roles of a country in the southern of Europe, like Portugal and Denmark, because they have affected by the crisis in a very different approach. And certainly, one of the key questions in the next framework is definitely the overall amount of R&D investment throughout Europe at large, but also the way to distribute the investment. In particular, I will start with, a political statement that for the benefit of Europe at large, we need to foster the social cohesion of Europe. And definitely, as the Portuguese Prime Minister António Costa has actually framed the Portuguese position in Europe, we can only envisage an European towards convergence and certainly by 2030 to have a more socially cohesive Europe, where also the investment in knowledge is open to opportunities to everyone. And therefore, apart from the overall discussion of the amount of investment, apart from many other things, we also need to understand institutions and people at large in terms to better understand the level of cohesion, of knowledge-based cohesion we want out of Europe. I have some slides. I don't know if I should present them or not. Probably I don't need the slides, but deve estar aqui. 2 weeks ago, in Lisbon, during the Web Summit, many research centers, engineering centers, and companies presented flying cars. Actually, Uber presented here the flying car. Also, a Portuguese engineering center, SEIA, also presented a flying car. And I start with these issues because it helps us discussing the future. Flying cars probably are not new at all. Actually, como é que eu posso passar isto? Okay. Flying cars were discussed 120 years ago. Actually, this is a very nice picture drawn in 1882 as a vision very much by Victor Hugo about the exit of the opera in Paris by the year 2000, where people were leaving the opera in flying cars. And therefore, by discussing the future, certainly we better understand where we want to be. And again, this meeting is particularly important for Europe at large to discuss where we want to be in 2030. But to discuss the future, the best way is also to understand our current capacity, where we are, where we want to be, and how to get there. And let me give you an example of Portugal. Last year, The Guardian and the National Geographic, among many other issues, also very much reported by the American Academy of the Advancement of Sciences, reported Portugal as the world record in a number of consecutive days fully powered by renewable energy. To understand this, we need to better believe on the way to build the necessary capacity apart from installing, in this case, hydroelectric, wind or solar energy infrastructures. Actually, most of this work is the result of a long-standing framework of industry-science relationships in the field of engineering systems, very much oriented towards the energy sector. A key example is the work of one of the largest, if not the largest, research institute in Portugal, in ESCTEC, centered in Porto, in very much connection with the University of Porto and the School of Engineering, developed with the major players in the energy sector in Portugal, a unique capacity to better integrate the need of understanding energy dispatch, which follows strong fluctuations in time and space, with the production of different forms of energy. The Innov Grid, among other projects, has involved more than 200 people over a period of 20 years that allowed it to build the capacity to better integrate renewables into the electric grid. A similar group, and very much related with the outcome we observed in 2006, was certainly the development of distributed management systems for the energy network, which has evolved over the last 20 years, probably about 75 new PhDs, essentially trained in industry science research environments, again, very much led by ESCTEC and the University of Porto. More recently, also a large investment of a major European player, Bosch, in Portugal, has been associated with an interesting initiative to develop in this country, again, in a environment shared among industry and research, particularly at the University of Minho, a new generation of car multimedia. And the question is why Bosch has decided to install this in a Portuguese university and actually built a platform among a number of startups also installed around the University of Minho. Moving to the mobility part, we have also been understand that the current challenges, the Sustainable Development Goals and the Agenda 2030 as arrive and essentially raised to all of us is in terms in mobility. And therefore, if you go to the city of Barcelona, of Milan, you will be able to drive a scooter which has been actually installed based in a software information-based information system which was developed in Portugal by SEIA. My final case is actually, I just arrived from Brazil 2 hours ago, and I came from the Florianópolis summit where, together with Brazil, Uruguay, Argentina, a number of research institutions in the United States, but also in the United Kingdom, Spain, and Brazil, Argentina, and Uruguay, we established the Atlantic International Research Center to foster, above all, cooperation between industry, research institutions and governments in the Atlantic, and towards the building up of an international platform which, among many other things, will be aimed to occupy the Atlantic, making use of unmanned space and underwater vehicles. Essentially, the bringing knowledge to the Atlantic and essentially making happen a better understanding of the positioning of Portugal in the Atlantic in terms of North-South, South-North cooperation has been very much associated with an increasing movement towards the collaboration between industry and science. And last July, Commissioner Carlos Moedas has signed here, together with South Africa and Brazil, the so-called Belém Declaration, which actually has already opened a new framework for funding industry-science collaboration, particularly between Europe and the southern countries. Actually, the Air Center that we have just established this week is very much concentrated on bringing a new dimension of knowledge-driven economic development in North and South zones. But the important thing when we look at all these case studies is that essentially we can understand either the way we can use the knowledge for existing or try to move to new markets. Essentially, if we want just to use existing technology or to move to new technologies. And the discussion in Europe is very much centered on this issue, particularly if we should concentrate the production of knowledge and therefore the concentration of new technical developments in some zones of Europe, or if you can expand these production and diffusion processes all over Europe. Again, I started with identifying the question of the increasing diverging geography of knowledge in Europe as a key issue, and the discussion either at a political and economic level has been particularly associated with how far different European regions do have the capacity to share an increasing uncertainty either in the markets or in technical and scientific development. Are all European zones, and in this case Portugal, really able to deal with a world of increasing uncertainty? Certainly when we look at markets worldwide, but also at the way we have our scientific capacity able to deal with uncertainty. Are our higher education institutions really training people and developing jobs for a period where we don't know which jobs will exist in 10 years' time, but also are we able to drive the capacity in a dynamic environment for situations which will be particularly dealt with uncertainty, and again, uncertainty also in the marketplaces. And this again is not new. Either the European schools of thoughts, particularly science policy people like Chris Freeman in the last 15 years, particularly before he died, he definitely, particularly at the OECD level, particularly emphasized this question of how far the critical nature of some zones in Europe will be able to cope with an increasing pattern of uncertainty. The same actually in the United States, was very much dealt either by the School of Thought in Colombia, but also in California by Stanford, and in particular by Nathan Rosenberg, which addressed very much the key context of the concentration of knowledge investment in the United States, when he really understood the situation in California together with the East Coast compared with the overall situation of the United States. And therefore, the key question of building capacity to deal with uncertainty has become very much also an issue not only in the concentration of knowledge in the United States, but certainly more and more in the current European context, which we know is a quite interesting fragmented situation of different countries. And therefore, this is important to understand because there is a clear impact of uncertainty in the process of technical change that we live with, particularly in the current European context. I will argue that we need definitely to help our knowledge institutions, particularly higher education institutions and research centers, but also our companies, to become more dynamic in a way we can speak about learning organizations, and essentially try to move from the old paradigms of protecting just intellectual property to essentially building learning networks with interesting penetration into the markets, adapting constantly our products and systems. This is not new. We have here Dominique Welek. The OECD published this type of graphic 30 years ago, when the TEP, so-called TEP program, Technology and Economic program in the OECD, this is, I believe, early 90s. And essentially, the OECD by that time was arguing that more and more we have a large pyramid where the flow of graduates is essentially the key context, and therefore you need definitely to expand higher education more and more to train the necessary human resources to fill it. And then we have a strong and very stratified pyramid, which will certainly involve mobility of researchers, research contracts. I'm destroying the part of the European Commission, I apologize. Licensing, spin-offs, joint research labs, and certainly with a strong need to accommodate a number of different intermediary institutions from incubators, science parks, and therefore 30 years ago the OECD made a lot of recommendations in terms of framework conditions, but also support schemes for cooperative research. And actually this is ongoing discussion which has not been finished. It has been particularly affected in the last 3 years, I will say, by the context of the need to better understand climate change and sustainable development goals. Actually, the United Nations and under the Addis Ababa Action Agenda 2 years ago certainly introduced an important point of the cooperation between knowledge through technology, but also finance in terms to meet the development sustainable goal. Again, the transition in the energy field is a key issue, although it is affecting many other parts of the social context, not only in Europe, certainly, but at large in all world countries. And actually, in the last United Nations event in Singapore, the UNDP actually recognizes that at a world level, this is far beyond the question of Europe, but the need to invest more in science, technology, and innovation has started to become, particularly in the Agenda 2030, a key point. So again, we look at Europe, but the discussion worldwide is much larger than the question of Europe. And again, the key issue behind this is the level of concentration, also when we look at Europe at the world level. Certainly, the implications of this type of assumptions, and I believe they are particularly critical in Europe, is a clear decision to invest in human resources in any corner of Europe. And that is probably what Europe must decide in the next year. Shall we concentrate the investment in people in some zones of Europe, or shall we open to every single part of Europe and actually attract to Europe others which want to come to Europe and to work in Europe. And this decision certainly is a very difficult social, economic, and political decision at an European level. We know that beyond the issues of climate change, we have more and more connection. I don't need in this audience to explain why we are more and more connected, but we live in a connected world, almost connectus, as some people say, and therefore I will argue that the key issue for policy action when we address this type of issue is that we need to understand innovation as the result of a long-term cumulative, collective, and uncertainty process, which certainly involves the division of labor, and most of people don't want to admit it. We cannot consider only, say, rocket science. We need to really understand the division of labor and the diversification of the research system. And this, again, is bringing new environments, particularly also for Europe, but requires, in my view, the massification of the training of human resources. Portugal has achieved this year 4 in each 10 people of 20 years old participating in higher education. Is extremely important. We are in the European average, similar to Spain, similar to many other countries. But this is not enough. We know that the most competitive zones, also in Europe, but also in the United States, have at least 6 to 7 kids of 20 years old participating in higher education. The economic and social effort to enlarge the participation in higher education is probably one of our key issues, particularly associated with the overall education system and the need to bring everyone in the margins of our society to the center of the knowledge-based economy. So, do you want to bring everyone to participate in this large effort? And I will argue that this depends very much on the structure of the economy. It does not depend only on the structure of the science and research system, but we need to accommodate an economy which is dynamic and which actually addresses and demands the necessary context for a knowledge-based economy. Certainly, this discussion do require understanding a lot of myths. And the work of Mariana Mazzucato, now at University College London, has been particularly pedagogical at European level, particularly to debug these myths between public and private, this division which actually has fed most of our research system is an old division, but very much between R&D and innovation, or of higher education and vocational training. And again, the better understanding of these issues, particularly in times where we live on increasing socialization of risks and the privatization of the economic rewards. And this issue actually is putting a lot of pressure in governments, also in Europe, and certainly the need to better understand the relationships between public and private and public relations. What we have done and we are doing in Portugal, actually, this, I will say, was the scenario since the last 30 years. I do remember that the first scientific meeting in Portugal happened only 30 years ago, in 1987, organized by José Maria Negago. And since then, particularly under his leadership, the idea was very much to broaden up the basis by bringing more students to higher education and at the same time to pull up the knowledge of the system, particularly with a strong science policy oriented towards human resources. We know this is not the only way of doing. Other countries, and actually Portugal, in different parts of these 30 years, in different periods of these 30 years, have decided just to concentrate knowledge and not to open. So the idea to have a orthogonal understanding of science and innovation, particularly in the current European context, is one of the decisions which should be taken at Europe in the months to come. In order to do this, the current Portuguese approach is not only to open the basis and to pull up the knowledge pyramid, particularly by intensifying the research system, but also diversifying our context. And I believe this is one of the most important issues, particularly when we address science-industry collaborations, is to understand the need to diversify higher education and research, but also to diversify the institutional contexts, particularly to increase the relevance of intermediaries in the knowledge-based economy. We have implemented in Portugal the so-called interface program, and we are particularly active in setting up what we call collaborative labs between industry and research organizations, particularly oriented towards more employment. And when I say a policy oriented to human resources is certainly the one which looks at employment, employ everyone, provoke better jobs, to facilitate access to everyone, and also to facilitate scientific careers. So the idea to identify different dimensions of policy is particularly critical. I don't go to the critical maps of open innovation and competence building if we go from the market to the available knowledge to the research system, but essentially we know this is a complex paradigm which certainly involves individual mobility, mobilizing program research agendas, networks of scientific organizations, and more we are putting the emphasis on collaborative arrangements to really make institutional contexts for these collaborations, particularly in a way that we can open new technology-based firms and an entrepreneurial culture which will drive a number of different situations. Currently in Portugal, if we drive a similar picture of, say, 100% basic research, 100% applied research, 100% public funded, 100% private funding, we know certainly that business firms are here, universities are here together with polytechnic, state labs, associate labs. What we are trying to do now is to fill this gap in order to really and effectively try to promote an environment where the transmission of knowledge from business to industry and from business to research and research to business flows in the two directions. Actually, we can compare with different countries. If we go to Germany, for example, one of the interesting characteristics of the German system built over the last 60 years in a completely different economic context is the very much diversified and also stratified arrangements of the industry science collaboration from business firms, the Fraunhofer, the Leibniz Institutes, the Helmholtz, the universities, the Max Planck, and the multiple institutional arrangements which will enrich and densify the landscape with knowledge-based activities. So essentially, we are speaking about densifying the European territory with different type of institutions throughout Europe. To finalize, the Portuguese trajectory is well known. When we plot the gross expenditure on R&D divided by GDP, 30 years ago, we were investing about 0.5% of GDP. Essentially, by that time, 75% to 80% was public. Industry was essentially 25%. We achieved the maximum investment in the year 2010 with 1.6% of GDP, with 50-50, so completely changing the structure of the economy by that time when we compare 30 years ago. But that change was not enough. The crisis, as in many other countries in the European freeze, affected this division. The year 2006 was the first year of the recovery to the European convergence, and now European convergence will mean essentially achieving in 12 years 3% of GDP investments, and the forecast is that we should have 2/3 business industry and 1/3 the public system, and this will require in the coming 12 years to multiply by 2 the public expenditure and to multiply by 4 the business expenditure. If we can do, it will be our collective challenge to address this type of evolution and pattern. Thank you very much.
vamos começar.
Colleagues of the Commission, ladies and gentlemen, let me first thank the Commission for having offered the OECD the opportunity to share with you its analysis both on science-industry linkages and also on Portugal. In fact, I was in Lisbon already 2 weeks ago, where we had sort of twin events here. One was about discussing the ongoing review of innovation and research in Portugal that OECD is doing with Minister Heitor. And the other event was about industry science linkages that we in fact call knowledge transfers. And normally my presentation should start at this point, but I could, well, you will catch up with the slides when they come. In fact, Minister Heitor told you most of what I was going to say, so that will be mainly repetition. You won't be lost. Starting with the number, yes, here it is. Let me be careful not to break it. Yes, $356 billion. It is the yearly spending that is done, that is performed in universities, higher education, and public research in OECD. At a global level, we are above 450 billion, and at current trend, we will reach certainly $500 billion in 2 or 3 years' time. So the question that comes naturally after having seen this number is, well, what is it useful for? What is the impact, not only on knowledge, that's fine, and that's important, but also on the well-being of society, on the jobs, value creation, and the like. And that's where knowledge transfer comes on the stage. Developing industry science linkages or knowledge transfer is important, so for transforming this knowledge into value, but also the other way around, for making sure that the knowledge that is created, at least part of it, is oriented from the outset towards the objective of creating at some point value. And this issue of transferring knowledge or sharing knowledge has been at the center of science and innovation policies over the past 2 to 3 decades. Manuel was mentioning this OECD report of 1992, and in fact this issue predates this report. So what are the carriers between academia at large and business? Well, they are well known. The main of those carriers is people. Even at the digital age, knowledge travels mainly in our brains on a sort of biological vector. So it can be students' placement, and that is the major one. And the first mission of universities is to train people, to endow them with knowledge that they then implement in industry, administration, and the like. And second carrier is researchers' mobility. We'll see later that there is a sort of intermediate or mixed model that is students' entrepreneurship. So people is the first carrier, collaborative research, doing research together, contractual research, business giving money to universities, but usually they are a bit monitoring closely or a bit involved in the research. Spin-offs, universities, PROs creating new companies, intellectual property, licensing, sharing infrastructure, that is often underestimated, how it is important, all these large infrastructure, hadrons and the like that universities, PROs have, that are used by businesses. And finally, and it is a sort of most natural one in many respects, it is publicizing results. You make you make public the result of your academic research. They can be accessed by businesses. And it's not only the results of the research, but also the methods, and increasingly important, we will see data. So this is just to show you a few numbers. This is about the transfer via graduates who then go to the private sector. And we looked also at humanities and social sciences. It's not only hard sciences. And you would be surprised to know that in the IT sector, half of the graduates that are recruited in IT and software sector are from the social sciences and humanities. So it's not about only technology. Innovations coming from the academia, there are all household names, the GSM, MP3, Google, Linux, and so on. Academic patenting, it has been on the rise, although it has been sort of plafonning over the past 5-7 years, but it has been rising fast in the year 2000 following the reforms taken in many countries for sort of Bayh-Dole Act, which means that universities, PROs, were endowed the ownership of their inventions when they patented it. A strong incentive. So these are the carriers. What can government do in order to boost knowledge transfer? So here I put together 4 categories of policies. There are various ways of classifying these policies. First, you can set up or strengthen specific institutions, academic institutions, whose mission from the outset is to produce knowledge that will be useful to industry and that will be transferred to industry. So it is, of course, the polytechnics, notably in Portugal. Second, setting up intermediary institutions. And as Manuel made it clear, many of them do exist now. We will see that later. It's part of the solution. It is part sometimes of the problem as well. Financial support, so giving money, some sort of incentives. If you transfer knowledge, you will have more money, be you on the public or on the business side. So R&D tax credits can be doubled or tripled in certain countries when the R&D is performed in a university. You can fund as government directly cooperative research. You can support mobility and so on. And finally, all sorts of regulatory measures regarding the governance of universities, having business people in the board of universities, for instance. The statute of researchers, that can be really an obstacle to the mobility of researchers to the private sector in many cases. So facilitating this mobility is part of the statute, notably. Intellectual property, of course, labor market regulation, and so on. So this is a sort of general landscape. So looking at what is new, more recent, let's say over the past decade or so, what has been changing is that knowledge transfer used to be mainly a sort of conversation between 2 institutions, sort of university or PRO on the one hand, and one business on the other hand, and possibly a TTO in the middle or more on the university side. But that was something quite linear in certain respects. What is the reality now? It's much more diverse, much more vibrant. It's about these ecosystems. So just to show you an image that is not from OECD, by the way, but that is very illustrative of that. You have all sorts of actors operating between PROs and businesses with mixed status. You have intermediaries. You have actors with very variegated roles. Some of them transfer knowledge, others provide the funding, others ensure sort of administrative support, and so on. And this is taking place first because there was, well, not first, but partly because there was these policies that government encouraged the emergence of such actors. There was demand on the business side to densify the bridges, but also due to digitalization. Much of the interaction now, in addition to people, you can't do without people, basically, but much of that is facilitated by digital tools. Whenever you have such linkages now, it's high density information exchanges. You need digital tools that help actors knowing better each other, and most important, probably, that much of the knowledge transfer occurs through data sharing. So what does it mean in terms of carriers and in terms of policies? I will be very quick on that, but we will have examples over this day. First, TTOs that were created initially as mainly handling intellectual property on behalf of universities. Now they have a much broader role, and they are marketing non-patent services, creating an innovation culture, so working upstream with researchers in universities. You have networks of TTOs, mergers of TTOs across organizations, and so on. You have also, as we will see, various statutes now of TTOs. Some of them are totally private. Some of them have a mixed status. We have the SAT in France that are owned by government, but which are supposed to be profit operating entities. So you have a diversification of role and of statute of the TTOs. Then you have platforms. So platform, that's a catch-all word. In this particular context, so platforms are internet-based entities that interconnect scientists with businesses and with other actors, notably with funders, of course. They operate under very variegated business models. The four that I listed here are totally different from each other. Innocentive is an auctioning site, essentially. They put research question at auction. Researchers submit solutions, and the winner gets the prize. Of course, it's a bit more complicated than that, secrecy, IP, and so on, but it is a principle. You have researchers' network, like ResearchGate, academia.edu. I'm sure that all researchers in this room are members of these networks. Blockchain, which is a public ledger that guarantees that authentication of discoveries, in that case, or inventions. And you have in development a market for invention that is called knowledge.io, that is based on blockchain. And universities as platforms, this concept is now very fashionable in many countries. Beyond the TTO, it is the entire university that is entering a platform, that is becoming a platform, meaning that it's not the interface goes beyond being an interface. It goes deep into the university. It can offer as a sort of catalog to potential to businesses with potential interest all the research portfolio of the universities, publications, researchers, curriculum, and so on and so forth. So one example in British Columbia. Promoting openness in science. Open science is an extremely important trend at the moment. It's about giving easier access to the not only to the discoveries and inventions of public research, but also to the data. And so a lot of investment is being done here. I will just insist on it's intuitive why it is important for knowledge transfer. Just point on one particular aspect, reproducibility. Now, once upon the time, academic research had this aura of being serious. It's about truth. Business research, well, it's about secrecy, might work, you're not sure. Well, we've seen in recent years, notably in the biosciences, that things are not that simple. A lot of results from public research are not reproducible. And when I say a lot of, in certain areas, it can be 90%. So if you're a drug company that you want to test a number of active principles, you won't start nowadays from the academic literature anymore. Or you will start by trying to reproduce results which have been published, including in the best reviews. So which is an issue when you want to transfer knowledge. You want to transfer knowledge, well, that is accurate, right? You don't want to transfer lies or wrong results and so on. So it's important, open science is important also from that respect in order to check the validity of the knowledge produced by academia, and that can boost business research and business innovation. And final trend that I want to mention, it's about entrepreneurship, and notably students' entrepreneurship, with the realization that if you look at the most successful startups, household names, Google, Facebook, and the like, they were not founded by researchers who would then move to the public sector. They were founded by students. Okay, good students, graduate students, PhD students, and the like. There are good reasons for that. Usually when you become researcher, it's not universal, but there is a tendency to that. A researcher has interest in knowledge. A business person has interest in market, money, growth, and so on. And these two tendencies, these two motives might coincide up to a point. But beyond that point, they might not exactly, let's say, trigger the same actions. So if you have people taken early in life with good knowledge, very good knowledge of the area, but who has also the profile of a business person, you might, from this basis, create businesses that will be much more high growth than one that are created by, let's say, seasoned researchers. So that's a policy issue. How do you instillate in students' mind, or those who have the potential of doing it, including the best students, how do you instillate some entrepreneurial spirit, first? And second, how do you facilitate, for those who make the choice of creating a company, how do you facilitate the implementation of their idea? And then there are many actions taken in countries about that. It's about training to entrepreneurship that should be practical. And the theory of entrepreneurship, it's like the theory of riding a bicycle. It's fine, but practice might be more important. It's about giving small grants for people to test their ideas, students to test their ideas, and so on. Then I will end this talk by mentioning the ongoing OECD project on these issues. It's about assessing the policy mix for knowledge transfer. We are doing a mapping of the national policies based notably on the questionnaire that we are doing with our colleagues of the Commission, the Science, Technology and Innovation Policy Questionnaire, where we relate knowledge transfer policies to the national context. There are certain high-level general rules, but it turns out that, and it's not surprising, that the best policies are really country-specific. You have to take into account, as Minister Hayter said, the industry structure, for instance, but also the science structure, all the institutional context and the like. We are doing case studies, and we are focusing a bit on student entrepreneurship. So just to conclude by a very general statement. So good knowledge transfer, it's about international experience, exchange of experience. That's what we do in OECD with this project. And it's also about conducting sound and effective evaluation of national programs and policies. That's what we are also doing with the review of Portugal at the moment. Thank you.
So welcome everybody.
Katarina Machado, but also Torbjørn Olausson from the EU rep in Denmark, and Ana Correia from my team in the European Commission's Directorate for Research and Innovation, where I am the chief economist for all the work that has been done to put together this very interesting conference of today, and particularly now that we have listened to Minister Hayter and Dominic Guélec with very inspiring talks, I think we can roll up our sleeves a little bit and discuss in a more informal way some of the issues that are behind this, let's say, challenges and opportunities that science business cooperation is going to bring about in the future. But before doing that, as we have, I think, 1 hour for this session before we open to the questions and answers of the public, what I would suggest is that I do a little bit of an introduction to link, the discussions of this panel and to focus it a little bit after the 2 speeches that we have had. And then I will present the speakers and give them the opportunity to do like 5 to 10 minutes introduction, on what they consider these key aspects in relation to incentives and obstacles to science business cooperation. And then I will pose to them a little set of provocative questions which I have been working on to see, where the let's say the expertise of their own, or where their own views, can contribute to understanding better, where these problems are. So as I say, it was a pleasure to listen to the previous speakers, and what became very clear to me, just in a couple of points, is that first of all, knowledge transfer has been at the center stage of research and innovation policy for already 2 decades, like Dominic said, and it must be because it's a complex issue, that is quite clear, but it must also be because we're probably ill-equipped to measure it properly. The indicators that we have are only kind of operating at the margins of a very big and complex phenomenon. And also because I think from a policy point of view, not a lot of progress has been really made in the recent past. So this is why, we are still where we are in terms of science business cooperation, why it is still, a hot issue in the political agenda. I think that also another, let's say, lesson that I drew from this morning's experiences was that in line with the open innovation and open science paradigm, knowledge transfer is also changing from more face-to-face mediation between universities and businesses, like Dominique was saying, to much more non-linear support, or a move towards learning organizations and learning networks, like Minister Aitor was pointing to himself. And this is done in ecosystems which are complex, which contain, venture capitalists, business angels, incubators, startups, fintech, you name it. But also is increasingly driven by digital tools, internet-based platforms, and upgrade, let's say, of traditional instruments or traditional missions of existing organizations and institutions, such as technology transfer offices, which are now, as also Dominic was saying, expanding a bit the realm of competence. So Sofia Alves this morning, she said that today's event is targeting, in line with the semester spirit, stimulating an enhanced dialogue in view of the country reports and the country-specific recommendations that are going to come in the beginning of 2018. But I think it's also very timely, and I agree on this with the Minister, because the Commission adopted yesterday, actually, its annual growth survey. And as you know, the annual growth survey is the kind of kick-starting point of the European semester yearly cycle of economic policy coordination. And this year's annual growth survey is focusing on the virtuous triangle of investment, reforms, and responsible public finances. But I think what is quite important is that it has a focus on productivity. The focus is on raising EU's productivity and to raise the productivity of the EU and overcome Europe's innovation paradox. We need, of course, a lot of investment and a lot of reforms of the science and innovation systems of the countries, and this includes tackling the obstacles to science business cooperation. In my view, this innovation paradox is underpinning the landscape of science business cooperation, because we have digital technologies which are emerging incredibly quickly. So everybody talks about robotics, artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, big data, machine learning, etc. And this is all promising a lot of productivity gains, but these are not yet materializing. So we need reforms of the systems, not just investments. And this is also what the Minister was rightly pointing at. So we need a combination of both. And science business cooperation and the kind of advancement in understanding this phenomenon through, for instance, the mapping of policy mixes that Dominic was pointing out before, will be crucial, because these are issues that are very much dependent on country characteristics, on economic structure, sectoral characteristics, and ecosystem specificities of the different countries. So you cannot have a one-size-fits-all recipe to sort out, let's say, science business problem. And also, traditional indicators of science business cooperation are not, are out there. We have indicators that measure public spending on R&D funded by business. We have indicators that measure public-private co-publications. We have indicators that measure how many researchers are going into the business sector, and these are all complementary indicators, but they are imperfect. And I think that we need much more micro work on the micro data that allows us to understand where it really, and how these science business links are operating in practice in the different country circumstances, sectoral circumstances, and ecosystem circumstances. I think that, right before presenting the speakers, I just wanted to conclude by saying that, and Sofia also said it this morning, that Portugal and Denmark are different. They are different because they have different economics structures, but they also have different science and technology and innovation systems. One is a leading innovator in the European Innovation Scoreboard, the other one is a moderate innovator, but it is clear that they also share a number of features. First of all, both economies are growing very fast. I don't know what is happening with my microphone, but both economies are growing very fast, with GDP and employment increasing significantly in 2017 in both countries. So in Denmark, the real growth of GDP was about 2%, and in Portugal is expected to be 2.9% in the first half of the year. Both have also strengths in their attractiveness of the research systems and their human resources policy, and I think that Minister Heitor has made a lot of emphasis about the developments on human research, human resources policy in the in Portugal, and both have a country-specific recommendation in 2016 to improve science business links, and both have made a great deal of progress in relation to reforms in this issue. Some of the progress has already been reflected in examples that have been mentioned before, such as the program Interface in Portugal, the creation of these collab centers, or the work that is being done by the National Innovation Agency. In Denmark, an innovation fund was also established a few years ago. There are new binding targets to stimulate regional knowledge collaboration, and there is a lot of also new developments there. So that was a bit my summary and understanding of where we are in terms of the landscape of science-business cooperation. And now I will briefly introduce the different speakers and give them the floor, and I'm going to change microphone because I think that this one might work a little bit better. So the speakers that we have today in the panel are Professor Ana Costa Freitas, who's the rector of Évora University. She's sitting on my right-hand side at the end of the table. She is an expert in plant biology and agro-food, and has held a number of leading scientific and managerial positions in Portugal. She's the author also of a large list of relevant articles in her area, and she has been very active in EU advisory bodies, including participating in reform activities of the Horizon 2020 policy support facility. She certainly will be able to tell us what is, in her view, needed to boost higher education institutions and universities' engagement in science-business cooperation. Then we have Professor José Epifanio da Franca, who works at the Instituto Superior Técnico of the Technical University of Lisbon, and who has a PhD from Imperial College in Science, Technology and Medicine. He's an engineer, but also what I think is quite remarkable is that he's a venture entrepreneur that already founded a successful Portuguese microelectronics company, which is very much science-driven 20 years ago, and he was also former Deputy Minister for Education in Portugal. So I'm sure that he will have a lot of insights in relation to the main obstacles for science-business cooperation, also from the perspective of somebody who has been very active in funding a science-based company. And then we have Peter Silves Nielsen on my left-hand side, who's head of business development, innovation and entrepreneurship, and responsible for commercializing innovations of the Technical University of Denmark, TTU. And this includes managing the university's TTO, but also providing support to startups and innovation policy. And he knows extremely well how R&D is done in the business sector in Denmark, as he has been occupying as well a number of leading positions, including in some of the big Danish firms. And he's familiar with fintech and venture capital in life sciences, so his perspective from the industry angle will be also very relevant. So I would like to start the panel discussion by giving the opportunity to all the speakers to do an introduction of about 5 to 10 minutes where they outline what are, in their view, the main obstacles and incentives to science-business cooperation, and then I will pose a few more, let's say, provocative questions, as I was saying. So, Professor Freitas, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So, I think I can speak from here because I had made a presentation, but due to the point now that we are very much out of schedule, so I don't think that I need to make this presentation. I was supposed to talk about the bottlenecks that are here, that are presented to universities and to the researchers to increase this industry and academia interactions. I think the minister has already told a lot of things that I was supposed to say as well, or that I have prepared to say. So a lot of things are not needed. I just wanted to to make some points about the real bottlenecks, because I think that there are very good situations in Portugal, very good links between the industry and academia, and these were presented here by the minister. But however, we are not using the full force of researchers in the country. So I still think that there are a lot of bottlenecks, mainly in our mindsets, the mindsets of academia, the mindsets of industry, and like the minister pointed out, the mindsets of governments and politicians. It's not on research ministers, but it's also on the other people. So it has to be cleared to everybody that a sustainable growth cannot be achieved without innovation and knowledge going into the market. So this is the point where we have been doing a lot of research in university. In fact, we have now, like he said, and I was supposed to present as well, how we made things in Portugal. So we have made the formation of human resources. We have a lot of PhD people. We have research centers. We have associated labs to make networks, and this always with internationalization. But the point is, most of the PhD people are still in higher education, and I have some graphics that can show this. So we need qualified jobs, and we need people to go into the field to make this transfer of knowledge into industry and receive the demands of industry. So we have to, in terms of academia, we have to get out of our comfort zone, which is the teaching and the research that we do, but we have to do this more applied and to know the needs that industry needs and to respond to that. So the knowledge has to go into the society if we want to have a sustainable growth, which we don't have in Portugal yet. And we are doing much better now than we were during the crisis, but it's not a sustainable growth. So we need to reinforce the budget for research. It is more than clear to everybody. It is a scientific evidence that increasing the budget for research we will achieve a more sustainable growth, but we also need to increase the budget for higher education for the formation of researchers. So these two things has to be linked, and these two things, it's something that, at least from the side of academia, every year we have to remember politicians that this is the goal. And so I think this is very important, that for having a sustainable growth, which I must stress we still don't have in Portugal. And so this is one of the bottlenecks. And the other thing, which I think these collaborative labs that have been a lot of controversy here in Portugal, but I think it's a very good opportunity, because this forces people to get in touch. This forces people to work together, academia, industry, and research centers. And this creates jobs for the PhD people that we are forming, and we don't have qualified jobs. And so this is one of the main issues of the current policy that I think will make a difference in the panorama of this research, the growth in Portugal. Also, I will desire that these are done in the whole country, because we have a very different country. So Portugal is usually, even in terms of European funds, horizontally organized, though in fact we are vertically organized. So the interior part has no people, has a very, very huge demographic problem, and we have not so many industries, so we don't have any qualified jobs, so people will get on coming to the littoral part of the country, and so we are using maybe 1/3 of our country instead of using the whole country. So this is another bottleneck. It's not that I think that we can receive special aids because we need such special aids, but I'm sure we can be able to build very good projects in this part of the country, and an effort has to be done for Portugal to use the whole country instead of just a part of it. So this is one of the other bottlenecks, is that we are getting people out of this part of the country. So it's more investment in research and higher education, because higher education is who produces the people for research and for knowledge transfer to industry. And then it's to combine people. It is a question of mindsets of academia, industry, and we always forgot, when we think about this problem between industry and academia, we think this is the dialogue between these two actors. But politicians are always present, and they have to change their mindsets as well, because innovation has to go into the market, and research has to have a special attention, like higher education, when they perform their budgets. And normally, as I say, as all of you know, the results of this type of policy is not recognized after 4 years. And we have elections every 4 years. So this is a problem. We have to have a vision for the whole time, and a long-term vision in terms of this organization of the country, and this need for more people and more qualified jobs, because we are preparing people to go abroad just because they don't have jobs for the qualifications they receive here in Portugal. So this is one of the bottlenecks, and so it's a question of mindsets, it's a question of dialogue between not just in industry and academia, but also with politicians. I think these are the main issues.
Thank you very much, Professor.
I'm sorry, just I wanted to thank you for the invitation. It's always like this. I always do this at the end. I'm sorry. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation and the opportunity of being here. I mean, I could answer the question of this panel in 30 seconds. What are the obstacles? The willingness to do. What are the best incentives? The willingness to do. With your tolerance, let me share with you a little bit what I did already about 40 years of life. I did fundamentally academic career. I'm proud of that, and I got to the top of an academic career. During my initial university years, I worked with Nokia mobile phones. I worked with Siemens. I worked with Austria Microsystems. I worked with British Telecom. I worked with Rockwell Semiconductors in the United States. I mean, I worked with whom I wanted to work, and with whom recognized the value in what I had to offer to them. Then I created a startup 20 years ago, and the most important obstacle was actually hostility, institutional, internal hostility, which I easily overcome. Why did I do that? Very simple. My students could not find a job in Portugal for the knowledge that they were developing. It was a problem 20 years ago that I wanted to solve. Actually, I felt a tremendous moral responsibility to solve it, and I really did things to help solving the problem. It is a much bigger problem today, and I'll come to that at the end. Then for 3.5 years, as a CEO of Portugal Ventures, I invested in young entrepreneurs. Invested about 60 to 70 million euros, around 60 to 70 new startups. did a lot to incentivize the higher levels of knowledge within universities that I know fairly well to to consider launching startup projects. I even went abroad and talked to the PAPs, the UK association, and so on, to tell Portuguese PhDs that we had fantastic opportunities and instruments to support them to develop their dreams back in Portugal. And to my frustration, only about 10% of the startups that we at that time we invested were actually started by PhDs, only 10%. Now, today I keep on my activity at university, engaging with students and trying to stimulate entrepreneurship culture. I'm also an investor. I keep doing that. My concern, I mean, it's a very broad problem, and we heard very different dimensions of that problem. But my concern about this issue is actually only twofold. How can we employ the higher level of education that we keep producing? And how can we accelerate the development of the national economy by introducing elements of knowledge that today are not part of our economy? So it's really my two concerns are these two. We talk, and I'll conclude my first round of thoughts. We talk about a lot about science-industry collaboration. Translating knowledge in whatever format to the industry is fundamentally a business problem. Researchers in general don't know how to do it. It's not an administrative problem. It will not be solved through administrative measures. It's fundamentally a business problem. So if we really want to solve the problem, we have to find ways to make sure that business knowledge, business experience is able to go to the sources of where knowledge is produced to help translating that knowledge into the industry. I'm very, very much convinced of that. I've known and I've studied experiences, international experiences, where this has been successfully done, and where this has not been done, and the results were not produced. And one of the most striking cases, as my benchmark, is Israel. Israel did it very successfully about 30 years ago. But when they started doing it, they quickly understood that they're doing it the wrong way, because they were funding science and technology projects, which is not the same thing as funding companies based on science and technology. And they quickly understood it to make sure that they would adapt and start funding companies based on science and technology, which is not the same thing as funding or keep funding science and technology projects. So again, I don't think, I cannot see really obstacles. I cannot see, bottlenecks. There is a fundamental willingness to do things, because I think things are known for many years, have been known for many years. I've heard of these issues and have discussed them for at least 30 years. So they are not new. We know them. I think most of the people know what should be done. The big problem is to do it. As a businessman would say, is execution. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Can you work with this?
I will not go through all my slides because we are a bit behind schedule. So, but I think actually you can see DTU. What has been important for our relationships with the industry has actually been, you can say, the mission which were established when DTU was found back in 1829. And that is to create value based on science to the benefit of the society. And that has actually created a strong and long a tradition of working together with the industry to the benefit for the companies, to the benefit for the university, as well as the society. And when we talk about innovation, we think it's important to integrate, you can say, the entrepreneurial and innovation mindset in the education on, for the students. We also, have this collaboration between the public and private sector. We also focus on, you can say, how to commercialize our great ideas, inventions, and then we have a lot of focus on this entrepreneurial mindset to create or to establish a platform for creating new startup companies. And the TTO office, of course, plays a quite significant role in order to support this. I will not go through this. To just say that we are ranking quite high on the innovation score, and in fact we are number 6 in the world in collaborative publication with the industry. Actually, you can say as a result of our strong relationships. We actually also get pretty many inventions, and in 2016 we established 67 new startup companies. That is quite significant. One of the best way to transform, or not to transform, to exchange knowledge from the university to the industry is on this science industry collaborations, and we have above 1,300 active project running, so it's pretty high. And we did a study in 2016 where we actually assessed or asked a company to assess 11,500 R&D collaborations with the industry, and the results shows that these companies working together with DCU actually showed increased top line growth, created more jobs, and also invested more. And just as a couple of example of how we actually also could utilize the strength of position in Denmark within certain industry sectors. In Denmark, we have 3 global market leaders within hearing aid, and they have together invested in the Center for Applied Hearing Research at DTU, and that are actually enabling a very strong industry university collaborations. Another example is in Denmark we have 3 test center for wind turbines operated by DTU, and I think all the global wind turbine manufacturers, they're actually coming to D2 to perform tests. And that is also enabling a very strong industry science collaboration. And the last one, we have actually a very strong life science sector in Denmark. And one of the big foundation, the Novo Nordisk Foundation, has you can say sponsored or invested in a center for biotechnology research at DTU with a purpose to conduct, you can say, world-class research, but also to spin out companies based on, you can say, that research. When we talk about commercialization, that is, the value generation from IP and inventions. We have actually, you can say, a pretty big portfolio of our on patents, approximately 330 patents, and our current focus is actually to get more patents commercialized. Today we have approximately only 28% of these patents commercialized, and we have set at an ambitious target to commercialize up to 45%. And based on that, we have established a new commercialization process, which is a stage gate process. So when we take ownership of the invention, we actually also form a commercialization project with aim to commercialize within or before, you can say, the patent international states, and that is within 30 months. And one of, I think, the successful or the key success factors is a very good collaboration internally with the TT organization and with the departments. So we have established a key account approach towards each department with business development and legal people working closely together with the head of innovation at each department. And as you can see, we have actually also a pretty comprehensive TTO organization with IP, business development, and legal and startup competences. It is also very important to have an infrastructure to support, the development of inventions to start up companies, which is a key focus at the university. So we provide quite a significant amount of support. I would actually not go into the detail, but this part here, the research and innovation is at the DTU. The science DTU is our science and technology park, hosting approximately 150 companies. Skylab is a quite new initiative, and it's basically a student hub for innovation, where the students can come and test their great ideas. They can meet other students, or they can also meet, you can say, people from the industry or more experienced entrepreneurs. Skylab provides also access to prototyping and so forth. And we are currently, you can say, investing more into Skylab. So it will become a student and research hub towards a international innovation hub, where we basically combine technology and business through education, research, industry, and startup. So we look extremely forward to that. And that is based on a donation from the A.P. Møller-Mærsk Foundation. As you can see, our focus on our, on the startup cases has been quite successful, and it's primarily, you can say, student startups who has been driving this success. And if we look at the commercialization agreement on IP, we also on a positive a trend. 2016 we will be back on the line. I will not go through this case here. Then our challenges. I think the first challenge is that at the university, innovation is not considered as a contributor to the financial model at the university. It's a cost. And that put a number of constraints at the university, and I think we need to rethink that innovation needs to be seen as an integrated part on education and research, and therefore a contributor, you can say, a strong value contributor to the university. One of the key problems I think we have at the university is that we have a lot of good inventions, but we don't have support, high-risk funding support to develop and mature these to a level where they can get other kind of high-risk funding. So that is a key problem. And then we, I think also we need to work on how we assess, the value of a TTO organization. Is not just, patent. It's actually much more. It's also to drive, with the university, the entrepreneurship. We need to look at job creations and so forth. So this is, the task going forward. And then I'm actually coming from the industry, and I think from a industry perspective, I think one of the challenges is that it takes too long time to finalize, you can say, the contract, the research agreements, with the university. So I think the university also needs to be more agile and pragmatic in the way that they are thinking about, you can say, how to deal with IP issues and these kind of things. So that was my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Throw a very quick question to each of you, giving you 1 minute to answer, and then we open the floor to the public, and we eat up only a little bit of the coffee break. So my first question is the necessity to foster a culture change and to also have sustainable investments in research and innovation, but also in higher education, and to maintain, let's say, a strong human resources base in the country to avoid brain drain. So my question to you is, the public sector in Portugal is employing 3/4 of the researchers' workforce. This is, of course, a great asset for your country. However, there are few researchers that are actually pursuing an avenue of entrepreneurial research in comparison to the EU average. So do you think that higher education institutions and universities in Portugal are having in place the right incentives and that the kind of legal framework in Portugal is recognizing the experience of researchers that have spent time in the business sector duly enough? And if not, what are, in your view, these kind of key obstacles or changes that should be introduced in order to permit that this is done better?
Your question is how can we do to have more workforce, more qualified jobs, and more people coming from the universities to the industry, or back? No, both. Yes. So I think that one of the things is that Portugal is not such a highly industrialized country. So we don't have that much companies needing this expertise. Then there is also this mindset that PhD people or PhD people with achieving this grade of PhD, that they just know about what they have been studying, and that is not true. So there is a full of mindsets that the PhD students develop during the ages at university that is surely very much useful to industry. But then there is another issue, is that we don't have that much entrepreneurship still in some universities. So what was said, that they should be doing some startups and so on, that this is not in fact so much used in. I think we are getting into this. I think there are differences between the big universities, small universities, and so on, but this is also something that is missing. So is that we create in these people that the idea that you can have a job for your life and that you don't have nothing but just try to find a job. This is no longer true, even before, because we don't know which jobs will be in fact present when they finish their formation. Yeah.
Thank you very much for the clear and concise answer. Professor De Franca, the question for you, because you've been putting an emphasis on the, let's say, on the willingness to do, as the key element to foster this science-business cooperation. And we see that Portugal is becoming stronger in startups. There is, for instance, a share of gazelles in high-growth enterprises that has increased. There is a public policy that is being put in place around these collab centers, incubators. There is also an emergence of certain accelerators, and creative industries are also boosting forward. So in your view, have the obstacles and the incentives to the creation of knowledge-based or science-based firms which stem from the university angle, have this kind of framework of obstacles and incentives changed since you created the CHIP idea back in 1997?
I don't know if I understood your question correctly. Startups in Portugal, Portugal, I think, creates per year tens of thousands of companies. So I think we have to frame the problem, and we are talking about startups created based on university education. What I call tech-based startups. And of course, those tech-based startups are created by people with university degrees. That is not the issue. The issue is, in my opinion, that the rate of creation of startups based on the higher levels of education that the university produces, what we call science-based, is in my view not responding to the needs of the country, and I think a good indicator that response is not there is that the number of PhD qualifications in the university sector is actually increasing, and the ability of the industry to absorb that is extremely reduced. It's about 2% of the PhDs that are produced by the country are absorbed by the university. I personally, sorry? By industry, yes, sorry. My personal opinion, and I've heard both sides, right? I know well the Portuguese industrial sector when I was at Portugal Ventures. I know decently well the university system, and I think framing the problem is not correct, because what we say is that we don't have good companies that going to. I'm being a little provocative, right? We don't have good companies that do not recognize the fantastic knowledge that the universities produce. And I hear from entrepreneurs, people who are paying salaries, are exporting, contributing to GDP. They say, don't put a full professor in front of me. I don't even want to see them. That is not the problem. The problem we have to recognize, we have the economy that we have. Our economy is still very much dependent on what we used to call traditional industrial sectors. Clothing, textile, shoemaking, metal mechanic, molding, and so on and so forth. And we have fantastic companies. Companies that are competing globally, creating jobs, contributing to the exports, fantastic. But they are what they are. And they are not able to incorporate because they don't need most of the knowledge that is produced out of the research activity done at universities. They are not wrong. I'm not saying that the research that is being produced is wrong either. What I'm saying is that there is a problem. So that problem has to be addressed. And there are only two ways of addressing it, in my view. The public sector cannot keep absorbing those educations. In my view, it cannot. It's not sustainable. So there are only two ways of doing that. Either we are able to aggressively attract global companies to come to Portugal to anchor very advanced knowledge, and we don't have, by the way, many, I mean less than the fingers of a hand, multinationals with R&D or engineering centers in Portugal. Israel has 240, and we don't have even 5. So, but that can be changed with an aggressive politically driven action to attract that, which Portugal has never been able to do. Or then we have to create that economy. There's no other way. And the creation of an economy is to find ways of incentivizing the creation of startups based on those higher levels of knowledge. That is the problem that I had 20 years ago. I'm still very much concerned with that problem. And it's a problem that the country has to address. And in my view, we have not been able to address it in the right way. And there is another problem, is that this problem is not solved overnight. This problem has to be solved with a 20 years time frame. And then we go to other types of problems. We don't have the political framework to make sure, again, because there is not willingness to do it, in order to be able to solve national problems over a period of 20 years. Meaning that it has to be a national endeavor to get there, and not something that is done at the rate of governments coming into power. That's a big issue. Sorry, I was maybe a little bit longer than.
That was perfect, and you understood my question extremely well. My last question is actually to Peter Nielsen, and you know, as you're managing the technology transfer office as well of DTU, my question is, how are you changing, you know, the kind of spirit of the technology transfer office to adjust it to the new changing dynamics of innovation, you know, with the celerity, complexity, and convergence of technologies that is happening at this moment?
I think we have a pretty, you can say, comprehensive TTO organization. One of our discussions currently is of course, you know, how do we actually you can say change, you can say the organization to be more proactive towards, you can say, all the changes about open science, open entrepreneurship, etc. So what I have initiated is actually more, you can say, a political discussion internally in the university, also to get some direction on you can say how much focus you actually have to on patenting, you can say, inventions. Because I also strongly believe that you can say a TTO organization going forward should actually be more a facilitator, facilitating innovation network, the matchmaking between, you can say, all the parties, the industry, the scientists, the investors, etc. But I think we have recognized that we need to do, but we also need to get a buy-in, you could say, from the top management. So I think it will be less legal people, you know, going forward, and more, you can say, facilitators, business people, being able to have a more holistic view on how to nurture, you can say, the innovation networks.
Perfect, thank you very much. So before we take one or two questions from the audience, I think Professor Da Franca wanted himself to put a question.
I don't know if you noticed in the presentation from DTU, the content of TTOs. One key position was business development. The question is, I don't know if there are people from Portuguese, there should be from Portuguese universities. How many TTOs of Portuguese universities, or even how many leading research institutions that are engaging with business do have someone doing business development?
Hello. I recognize at least 4 people doing business development. Here in the room.
Some more. There was somebody over there who wanted. If you can briefly introduce yourself before you put the question.
So my name is Kim. It's working. Kim Kralgaard, European Investment Bank here in Lisbon. And Mr. Professor Epifanio, there was one thing that surprised me when in your last comments, where you were saying, how do we absorb all these PhDs and how do we solve the mismatch between what university is churning out and what the industry is absorbing? And you said, if I understood correctly, you get more multinationals to come here who can absorb them or create startups. But frankly, I believe the startups, employment creation in startups is a very, very long shot. And of course, the multinationals, the more the better. But isn't there a third area where there's a lot of innovation potential and is actually also happening, which is indeed the traditional industries, and where gearing up is an issue. I mean, these are fragmented, as we know, many of them, but I was very impressed by the mold industry here and the cluster they have and how the cluster is working, or the shoe wear industry. And of course, so far, value added in Portugal has not been so strong because brands have been outside and so forth. But how do you see that, the potential actually to absorb some of these high level through these cluster creations? How are these cluster creations working in your view? What is needed more? And of course, always, because we're an EU institution like the Commission, what can we do? But that's it. And that's a side point. Thank you.
If I may, I would like first of all to make a comment and the role that the European Investment Bank is having now in Portugal to addressing what I call the capital gap in the support of startups. The European Investment Bank has recently completed a credit line facility with Science4U. I know them well. I invested in them when I was at Portugal Ventures. Biosurfit, it would be a fantastic success case, even if it has some chance ahead. I don't think those companies would be alive today if it would not have been the role of the European Investment Bank. So thank you very much for being here and for bringing the support to the startups that we need to create in Portugal. you said something that is actually happening. So what is happening, in my opinion, I mean, and this is based on, I'm not a researcher of these things, right? So it's living, knowing, experiencing. What we are seeing is the incorporation of more knowledge and more technology in some of the most traditional industries in Portugal. This is happening. We have fantastic case in the shoemaking industry, for example. I think we have been able to, transform an industry that was fundamentally low labor cost living, not able to compete with the emerging countries in the East, and today is competitive to the Italian shoemaking industry, and that was done through incorporation of knowledge, new manufacturing processes, new even machinery, and so on and so forth. Actually, in machinery, machinery is one of the important export sectors of Portugal. And most of that machinery is using already advanced automation technology that may not be known. So this is a process that naturally will follow its course. I mean, companies that 10 years ago would not employ a single. I'm providing maybe an extreme view, but would not employ a single person with a university degree. Of course, they would not be able to employ a PhD. Now, if these companies now employ maybe 10 or 20 engineers, the human capital conditions to absorb higher level knowledge is there. And maybe they will start also employing. This is a process that I think will follow, but will not be able to respond, will not bring the speed of response that, in my personal view, we need, because the level of absorption is slower than the level of creation of PhDs. So to be honest, I don't see. I mean, I mean, give again my personal example. 20 years ago, my scientific area is semiconductors, chip design. I cannot. There was not then, and there is not today, one single company in Portugal that needs a guy that knows how to design a chip. And I mean, if I go through many of the scientific areas and research topics that currently are pursuing, we ask ourselves the question, what is the company in Portugal that needs this? Probably we won't find. And those that need are already absorbing. That's it. But if we don't have in Portugal, there is in the world. One of the beautiful things of globalization is that we can have access to the things that we don't have. We just need to go out there and to make sure that we identify the companies that may be interested and needing the knowledge that we have. So the only thing that I know it's not easy, but the only thing that we have to do is, rather than traveling to Brussels, we have to start traveling to Tokyo, to Beijing, to Shanghai, to Taiwan, to San Francisco, Boston, Berlin, and so on and so forth. I mean, I don't know. I don't know how to do it otherwise. I'm very, very much concerned, because I think it's not a sustainable situation, keeping up basically producing people that are potentially unemployed. And the only way of employing them is through state-driven mechanisms that, again, I personally don't believe are sustainable. So if someone has a different solution, that is most welcome.
No, thank you very much. I think this all concerns, of course, the issue of structural change in the economy, which is also needed, you know, let's say, in order to be able to absorb, you know what I mean, and have employability, you know what I mean, for all these, you know, PhDs that are being generated through the system, of course. But let us just take the last question, because then I'm getting already, you know, I mean, some looks like, you know, we are eating into the coffee break. So please, the last question.
Thank you for the conference. My name is Isabel Santos. I'm an owner of a consultancy company, and also I am a researcher pro bono as a volunteer. My experience is that we have been talking about success cases, but the vast majority of businesses in Portugal are managed by people who don't have higher education. So my question is how to build trust and how to overcome two problems, which are language and language. The first one, language, or the first language that I want to talk about is about who talks and who speaks English in Portugal. And this is a real higher barrier to have dialogue. The second is the code of experts who use languages that are codified and who the vast majority of business and managers don't understand. So my question is, how can we build trust overcoming these barriers and these blockages between science, universities, and business and managers? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Professor Freitas, would you like to take the answer to this question?
Well, I said, first of all, for the language problem, the English language problem, it is not, in fact, quite an issue nowadays in people coming out of universities. So it is for the others that don't have a degree and that they are in front of some companies. But this is a problem that we still have. I think one of the problems of having people that have not higher education and they have their own companies, this is a problem on the talking or the dialogue, but not because of the language. They can have a problem to go abroad and to their business, but not people coming out of the universities nowadays. Most of them can speak in English, and if not correctly, I mean, in 1 month they will be speaking correctly. So, but that there is the issue of dialogue, in fact, because of the different way that researchers or people from industry, especially these SPMEs, the way that we address the problems. But as the fact that I said in the first place, this is something that has to be in both sides. So we have to try it and to keep on trying. I think this is the point of willingness. We have to do it. I think it's very important. And we have this experience of having people going into these small companies, also some of them even pro bono or not receiving qualified like the degree they have. But then when they get trust, the problem is to get when they got the trust from each others, then things will go much better. And it's understanding that there is an added value of having someone like this. But of course, this is a problem of willingness and having to go on trying, because we have ages behind us. And in fact, this education in Portugal is coming since '74. Before that, we had a lot of people not going to university, not reading even. So this is very recent. So it is a problem of getting things done and run and getting trust between each other, I think.
Thank you very much. I think Peter Nilsson wants to make an extremely short complementary remark to this.
One thing I actually think is important to close, the gap is to implement, you can say, incentives or programs during, you can say, the education in the bachelor and also in the master to work on industry project, for the company on site in the company. That is actually pretty common in Denmark, and I'm sure that could potentially, you can say, change, you know, the way that you can say the business as well as you can say the students or the university is thinking.
Well, thank you very much. With this, we conclude the session, and I just would like to thank, like in the airplanes. So thanks a lot, and see you later.
Late incoming flight. Yes.
You know, where to come from, from a situation where